Well, thank you very much for having me here today. It's really an honor and great privilege for me to be here and to tell you a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing in recent years, focusing particularly on treatment development. So you've heard us talk a lot today about determinants of difficulties functioning in daily life for people with schizophrenia. I'll focus on one of our efforts to see if we can do something about targeting one of those determinants to help people with schizophrenia function better in their daily lives in the community. So rather than starting with a definition of social cognition, let's put it into action. Is this team winning or losing? Right. Yeah, most of the time you put together the clues, you see their heads hanging low, the coach has his finger out at them. This is probably not a team that's doing very well and getting an encouraging talk from the coach about how good things are going at this point in the game. They are most likely losing. How about this though, if we look at this video? Is this an example of someone showing good empathy or poor empathy?
Guess what? I got engaged last night.
Wow.
Yeah, he took me to my favorite restaurant and proposed at the table.
Wow. Yeah, when I proposed, it was like this big thing, and she wasn't even appreciative. So.
Well, I was. I said yes. It's going to be a great wedding.
No, I'm sure. Make sure you guys have separate bank accounts, because once you guys tie the knot, that's joint spending.
Okay. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm not even going to ask you your opinion on this one. This man is not meeting her where she's at in her excitement about getting engaged. He's talking about joint bank accounts. So we, even without thinking very hard, pick up on a lot of different clues when we try to understand social situations. But as we go about in our daily lives, it happens so quickly we don't even think about it. But it's actually a remarkably complex set of skills that we use to navigate the social world. What I'm going to try to do today in my time is talk just briefly about what social cognition is and its importance as a treatment target. Try to give you a sense of the way that we've been working on improving social cognition through the development of something we call social cognition skills training at UCLA. And then I'll tell you a little bit about what we've been finding. Does it actually help people? Does it work? And some of the new directions that we're pursuing these days in our treatment work. So as Michael Green spoke about earlier, social cognition spans a wide range of different areas. And this is a definition that I particularly like by Steven Pinker, a psychologist, who says we mortals cannot read other people's minds directly, but we make good guesses from what they say, we read between the lines, what they show in their faces and eyes, and what best explains their behavior. It is our species' most remarkable talent. One of the ways that I became interested in social cognition was working as a therapist with people who have schizophrenia. And I would hear them talk about things like this. Sometimes I have trouble knowing what a person's face really means. I think someone is angry at me and annoyed when they're really not. Or I can't relate to other people. I don't understand them. Being around other people makes me uncomfortable and overwhelmed. And it's not very difficult to imagine that if someone is really struggling with these kind of thoughts and feelings, it can easily lead to difficulties in communication, to avoiding social activities, things like situations at work or school where you have to interact with other people, which you always do. And even things like social isolation. So, as Michael talked about earlier, social cognition is a very, very broad domain. And in our research, when we've tried to learn more about the types of social cognitive difficulties that people with schizophrenia often experience, we've been guided a lot by huge developments in the area of social cognitive neuroscience, the social brain, as Michael talked about this morning. In the area of treatment development for social cognition, we've focused on partially overlapping topics with those that Michael discussed this morning and some other slightly different ones. One thing that was an enormous influence on me was I was fortunate enough to receive 2 Young Investigator Awards from NARSAD to help understand what some of these social cognitive difficulties are, neurocognitive difficulties are that lead to community functioning. So NARSAD has really had a tremendous impact on my work. In the treatment development area, there are 5 main domains that we've been focusing on. The first one is perceiving emotions, particularly from facial expressions of emotion. Social perception, doing things like understanding cues in one's voice or body language that help us communicate. What we call attributions or attributional style, which refers to how our own emotions impact the way that we interpret what's going on in different types of social situations. Empathy, which has been talked about quite a bit already this morning. And understanding others' intentions. Do they mean exactly what they say, or is there some more complex form of communication going on? Why target social cognition? I don't think I need to spend much more time on this because we've talked about it already this morning. People with schizophrenia often, though not always, experience substantial difficulties with social cognition, even from early on in the course of illness. And these difficulties are strongly related to how people function in daily life, even more so than the types of basic non-social cognitive processes that Amanda talked about this morning, things like learning and memory. So our group and several others around the country and around the world actually have been very excited about the possibility of trying to do something to target social cognition. We have developed this approach, social cognitive skills training, over the past decade or so at UCLA. It's an approach that involves 5 different treatment modules that target the 5 domains that I mentioned earlier. It's a group-based intervention type program, so we typically have small groups of 6 to 8 people involved, as well as 1 or 2 trainers. It typically is 24 one-hour sessions over a 12-week period. We use a skill-building approach where we really gradually progress from sort of the most basic nuts and bolts that you need to put together to understand social situations to more complex things like empathy and intentions. It's highly structured. Each session involves reviewing things that were discussed the previous meeting, then introducing a new topic to learn about for that particular session, and lots of practice. It draws upon materials from some other groups that have done work in social cognition, but we've also developed a number of exercises and training materials that I'll show you some of. And basically what we try to do is make it as little like this type of a presentation as possible. So not me talking at people in the groups, but we try to make it as much of sort of an interactive seminar type of approach where there's lots of interactions. There are games that we've developed that are played to really try to engage people in the process of learning about these social skills. And the way it's described to participants is what we're working on is trying to develop skills at becoming better social detectives. So we try to put together this whole list of clues, starting from basic ones to much more complex ones, like putting yourself in another person's shoes to understand their experience, and then figuring out whether the clues add up and tell a clear, coherent story, or whether we need to do more detective work to understand it because it seems like there are mismatches among the different types of clues. So let me walk you through the modules and the types of things that we do in our meetings. The first module focuses on emotion processing. We target 6 different emotions that are listed there. We talk about recognizing them on the face and identifying different social situations that often elicit these emotions. We start out going through in very fine detail what's going on in the face, the different regions, the top, middle, and bottom of the face, when you compare neutral on top, where someone has no expression at all, to something like an angry expression, where you can see very distinctive changes in each of those zones of the face as compared to neutral, although the forehead isn't particularly notably different for this emotion. It's never good enough to just look at things and talk about them. Everything gets practiced. So we do things like hand out mirrors to people. We practice making the expressions with each other and get feedback from each other about how well we're doing at expressing the different emotions. We get so good at it that you can actually just show someone a little sliver of the face and they can tell you that the one on the left is anger and the one on the right is disgust. And once we get good at doing that, we move on to the more complex social perception, identifying basic emotions in the voice and gestures, and integrating all these clues in different types of social situations. So, we broke down each of the emotions before on the face. We do something very similar with emotions in the voice, practice saying things with different emotional tones. We do the same thing for body language, where we would first talk through what are some of the characteristic differences between moving in a sad versus angry way. And then we do a lot of acting out. You can't have any, your difficulty acting silly in front of other people goes down a lot in these groups because we do a lot of practice together. Here's an example of one of the types of training stimuli that we would use. So which of the basic emotions is this gentleman experiencing? And it's not happy. Yep, so we would put together what's going on that lets you know that he is angry, frustrated, perhaps with not being able to find something on that desk. And then we do things like the social wave game. So at soccer matches or football matches, everybody kind of gets the wave going and imitates each other. We might have people read a scenario like this and then have everybody get up and practice saying, "Whose dog is that?" So acting it out for each other and getting feedback from each other about whether they can guess what type of emotion we're expressing. The third area, attributional bias, how our emotions impact our social interpretations, and we focus particularly on the area of suspiciousness in different contexts, whether it can be helpful or harmful in different contexts, and avoiding jumping to conclusions in ambiguous social situations. And so many social situations are ambiguous. We talk about the need to slow things down and gather information before jumping to conclusions. So the way we might go about working on this type of skill is you would read a scenario like this about John, who was supposed to pick you up but has never arrived, and then you're left trying to understand what's going on. Why didn't John come? So we would first talk about, okay, what are the facts that we know about this situation? What are our guesses? Well, one guess is John is just a complete jerk who's trying to make your life difficult and mess with you. Or it could be it's possible that maybe he's having some kind of an emergency. And then we trace these out, how different types of guesses about social situations can lead to different feelings, and ultimately different actions. So to really sort of stop this rapid process of jumping to conclusions about other people's intentions, slow down, and think through the different possibilities based on the evidence that's available. We've talked about empathy a fair amount today. We focus on both understanding how other people feel and then responding to other people in a way that's empathic based on that understanding. So earlier I showed you an example of a man responding in a pretty unempathic, unhelpful way. Let's see if we can do it better this time. Oh, can you go back? Maybe if you move the cursor off the video. Okay, there we go.
I got engaged last night.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. It's so, look at my ring.
Oh, it's beautiful.
He took me to my favorite restaurant, got down on one knee, and proposed. It was really romantic.
What a gentleman.
Yeah.
Oh, you guys make such a great couple.
Thank you.
When's the wedding?
We don't know yet, but it'll be soon.
Okay.
You want to come?
Please,
Okay.
please.
So she leaves that interaction feeling much more fulfilled, much more understood, and feeling like the man is joining with her in where she's at. And we do a lot of things about talking about what makes someone good or bad in these different scenarios, and then a lot of practice acting these things out in role play exercises. Finally, understanding intentions. We focus particularly on things like distinguishing among sincerity, sarcasm, and lying to be kind, and doing the detective work to figure out what's going on. So, in the scenario here, for example, maybe there are some times when lying to be kind could be a socially useful thing to do, even though you don't think your mother-in-law's haircut looks all that great. And then you can sometimes see some of the harmful effects of using sarcasm. Being back in New York, I'm finding myself using sarcasm a lot more. But it's not always a great tool, especially as you go outside of New York. So,
do you want to try the muffins I made last night?
Sure. Wow. These are amazing. Where did you learn to cook?
Thanks a lot.
So we also have versions of that video where the woman in the blue shirt is lying to be kind and being sincere. So we can pull apart what are some of the differences going on in those different types of communication in our groups. So then the big question, is it possible to change social cognitive skills through these types of interventions? And I'm happy to say that the answer so far is an optimistic yes. So we've published 4 trials, and we have another one recently completed that I'll be describing at another meeting in New York City tomorrow. As Steve Martyr mentioned, our strongest effects have been in the area of emotion processing, and then as well empathy secondarily. And I think it's interesting and important to note that these changes occur independently of any changes in other types of symptoms, positive symptoms, negative symptoms, or basic neurocognition, so non-social forms of thinking. Our group is not the only group that's been working in this area. Matthew Kurtz has a review out recently of 15 trials from the United States and abroad. They are showing consistently across these studies strong effects in the area of emotion processing, and then somewhat smaller effects in the more complex areas like mentalizing. And then a question came up earlier about, well, what's going on in these types of interventions? Are we just sort of changing the way that people are performing on our different tests that we use to assess social cognition, or are these actually making an impact on brain functioning? And here again, the early answer is yes. These types of training approaches can impact the social brain. So this is another review article, and several of the areas that you heard Michael Green talk about earlier this morning appear to be impacted by this type of intervention. Michael and perhaps Steve also mentioned that Jung-Hee Lee from our lab has a NARCED Young Investigator Award where she's using fMRI tasks before and after people go through our training program, and we're seeing initial evidence that we're getting some good results there as well. So to wrap up, the areas that we're focusing on these days, the first one, generalization to real-world functioning. So Steve Marder was talking about this just a minute ago. How do we get the effects that we see on our social cognitive tasks, the improvements there, to actually generalize to improvements in daily life functioning? We're not only doing the training in the classroom right now, we're also going with people out into the community to do social cognitive training exercises in real-world settings to try to cross that bridge. Pharmacological augmentation, Steve Marder talked about his NARCED-funded award that focused on the combination of oxytocin plus social cognitive skills training. Bob Kern from our lab is using social cognitive skills training plus vocational rehabilitation. He's found that difficulties in social cognition are one of the most important reasons why people have difficulty obtaining and holding a job, so we're hoping that this combination may be useful. And then more recently, we've started expanding this type of approach to other populations, and one of them is homeless veterans with severe mental illness, which is an enormous problem in our country and in Los Angeles in particular. So let me just conclude by again thanking you so much for your attention and for having me here, and many, many thanks to BBRF for all of the support that it gives to our work and so many other people studying schizophrenia around the country and the world. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yes, ma'am. Can you use the mic so people can hear you?
You didn't see. Sorry. There is severe mental illness in my family. I'm also a teacher and a trainer, and I teach speech and oral communication skills and theater skills. So I'm familiar with everything you put up there. Now, I have two questions. Number one, have you used what you're doing in other mental illnesses like Asperger's and bipolar situations? And when you put oxytocin up there, I'm wondering if you're encouraging some of the people who participate to have pets, because there are a number of studies, one at the University of Buffalo, about the ability of oxytocin through communication with animals to reduce blood pressure and to release endorphins. And I'm guessing that endorphins would be very useful in these situations because it would boost confidence.
Mm-hmm. So for the first question, when we first started working in this area, the research on treatment of social cognition and autism was really quite a bit further ahead than we were in schizophrenia. So there are a number of different types of programs like this for autism spectrum disorders. And when we were starting out, that was really one of our building blocks. So yeah, that's definitely there. We have not extended this to bipolar disorder yet, although in our vet samples, we are working with people who have a wide range of different mental illness conditions that they're dealing with. So hopefully we'll learn more about that. I'm a very proud owner of a dachshund and a Labrador mix. So I believe in the power of pets, but it's not something that we've pursued yet in our group.